So have you had any problems with memory limitations, or do you have any tips on how to optimize memory performance? I guess the first one is how do you find out that you have a memory problem, and the next one is how do you deal with it?
You want to go first, Milecia, or should I?
You can go ahead. That's a really good question.
I think I never had. I can't remember if I ever had a memory issue. There's like what you can see in the performance tab. Also, performance panel in Chrome, but also in Safari, you can see the current memory usage. And I think the only time I had memory issues was 10 years ago or something like that. But yeah, there was clearly a leak with something, and maybe an issue in the V8 engine or something. I don't know. And the only thing that I know for a fact you can run into memory issues is with WebAssembly, because there you have more control over a certain linear space of memory, and this can cause problem if you write like a little bit of Rust code that you compile to WebAssembly, and then this is eating up memory, then you have a problem. I haven't had this issue in a while.
Kind of like you, Nick. It's been so long since I ran into a serious memory leak or issue like that, but I remember vaguely, sometimes it's something with the use effect hook that can cause some weird side effects if you do some kind of hacky things to make stuff work. But other than that, I'm not really sure what else you could do for a memory leak issue, but just try checking all of the hooks, and maybe some custom hooks might be a good approach.
Yeah, I mean, if you use effect and you don't clean up the effect, but on every render you reattach event listeners, maybe that could eventually become a problem. But I guess browsers are so good and fast that it's not a big deal. I can imagine it's also like on sites and apps they're usually like short-lived. If they are in a browser, but if you have an Electron app and people let it run for days, maybe then it becomes more apparent. But haven't had this, with some clients we had Electron apps, but also haven't heard of this issue or haven't seen us running into it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we were lucky. Yeah, you have interesting questions like why is using so much memory, and I mean, I maybe it has something to do with the React and state management and all that. So in my experience, React is going to add some overhead. So I guess if you go for minimal memory use, you will not use React. I guess in that case. But do you have any experience on the topic, Andrey or Milecia?
Yeah, I think it was mentioned before by Milecia and Nik. Usually it's some subscriptions that cause memory leaks. Other than that, it's rarely anything else. That's actually one of the things I was going to mention during our optimization if we have enough time to get to that part. Building our custom store with subscriptions and stuff like that. So just unsubscribe when you subscribe.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and it's easy thing to forget with effects. And so, do you have anything to add to the topic, Milecia, or should we move on? Okay, let's do the next question. So, when has optimizing something turned out the worst for you? So I guess it means that you started optimizing something, but it didn't work out. So do you have examples of this in mind?
Oh yeah, that was one time kind of recently. I was working on optimizing a React app, and the way that the components were the way that the files were structured, there were multiple components in the same files. There were data fetches happening with prop drilling. It was a lot, but breaking it apart actually made things a little bit harder, because trying to figure out how to put all of the pieces back together and keep the performance benefits while not taking away any extra functionality was just kind of a challenge, because the existing app was so convoluted that breaking it apart just, yeah, it was a lot. But optimization didn't really help that one. They just needed a new app.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, because I mean, sometimes the thing you have to change the architecture. You have to change the entire structure of an app, and then it's tricky.
One thing that I can add is, well, it's not necessarily an optimization, but have you heard of the term optimistic rendering? So basically, when somebody, let's say, on a to-do list clicks on the item add to do, and you add the to-do even before the server confirmed that it's added, this is optimistic rendering. So you render it on the client as already successful, and only if it fails, then you return it. And yeah, basically this works because, for example, Apollo has a cache as well, and so on. But like when people use this extensively, I see lots of bugs cropping up, because apparently handling optimistic rendering, at least for me, it's really tough, and you forget about cases, or if the backend API changes, then you create bugs later. And this is so, I call this my number one consulting trick. If I go into a new job, I look at like how many optimistic rendering code snippets are there. If they use Apollo and in the Apollo cache, I turn off the optimistic rendering by default, and I solve 52 bucks, and everybody's happy and wants to pay me more. So this is, I mean, it's not entirely true, but it sometimes goes like that. And yeah, so I think this is heavily overused, and yeah. I mean, there are certain cases where it really, really makes a lot of sense. Like, I don't know, let's say you have a point of sale system and you have a waiter who has to type in very quickly the different meals they're ordering. This is the point where I make optimistic rendering, because this waiter, they don't have the wait time to lose 300 milliseconds for every meal. But if it's like in the settings where you change the profile picture, it's like, nobody cares if this is taking 100 milliseconds longer and a network trip.
Yeah, and I think you have these tricks, like you show this loading state. So instead of doing the optimistic rendering, you have intermediate state that's keeping the client busy in a way. That's showing that there's something going on, and then you confirm.
Yeah. And the other thing is like, yeah, so every time I see someone trying to, or like what's really painful is if you put a lot of effort in optimizing something and you gain 5%, and then you're, yeah, it's like you spend 2 days on something, refactoring the architecture, blah, 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 and then, you gain 5%. It's like, damn it, was it worth it? No. Yeah, this is performance optimizing can be painful.
Yeah, I think in my experience, sometimes what you need is a fundamental change. Like in this big case I've been working on this year, we made such change by actually pushing a lot of work outside of React. Because I think that's one of the obvious spots to look at is like how much work I'm doing, and am I doing the work in the right place? So in our case, the point was that there's a lot of data on the backend, and then the challenge is displaying this data as fast as possible. So then we have to find ways to do it. I think one of the discoveries of this work was the power and usefulness of workers. So do you have any concrete experience working with worker architectures with React. What's your feeling on workers and the future of workers?
Well, I can comment on that, on the workers, but not workers in traditional way. The workers that I'm currently using, they do not run JavaScript. Instead, they run WebAssembly code, and they do some WebGL rendering. So I'm not sure how it touches React directly, but general rule of thumb, use workers when you have to do some blocking heavy tasks, right? And yeah, I think that nowadays client applications, most of them still rely on the server to do heavy lifting for them. So, well, for my case, it was WebGL rendering for performance reasons, actually. So when you have lots of data on the screen and you start creating tens, thousands of DOM nodes, it's gonna drastically drop the speed, drastically drop the performance of your application, and the browser is gonna have hard time rendering and re-rendering and repainting of those DOM nodes. And with WebGL or Canvas, you can work around that by making certain sacrifices, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the main point, that if your main thread is starting to have too much action going on, then it likely makes sense to try to decrease the amount of operations you do there. And that's when workers come in handy. Do Milecia or Nik have any thoughts on the worker topic? Yeah. No.
Yeah. No. If I remember correctly, the React team investigated workers for a little bit, but yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe this was just Twitter background noise. That I don't remember correctly, but I think also my experience with workers was always I don't have much experience with workers, but what I heard always from other people that you run into 1,000 problems, and I think you can maybe you can comment on this because you did a lot with workers.
Yeah. I mean, my experience is that you start using workers, and then what you notice that there's not a lot of information out there. So, and then you're like, how do I know, if you have long-running workers, how do I know if my workers are still alive? And then you notice that I need to track it because there's no API for figuring out what's up. And then you find good abstractions, but then you get new problems like startup. So if you have big workers, they take a while to start up. And what I did today, I actually sped up my worker loading by using this link prefetch feature in the browser, because you can tell the browser that prefetch the certain assets. So when I start the app, it's already loading the workers to memory, and when it gets to the workers, it's using them from the memory. So then I don't get this loading delay. So that's actually a good performance trick, is to check out the prefetch and preload. So you can push a worker around.
I'll add just a little bit to it. Workers are really, really hard to debug locally sometimes. So I don't know. They give you a lot when it comes to optimization if you can implement them the right way.
Oh.
At least that's been my experience so far.
Yeah, I think you get really cool architecture because you have this message passing observables, and you can use RxJS with it. It's super cool because once you have RxJS, you can replay actions, and you can get the last state you can use RxJS as your state container with React, and then do quite complex things on top of that. I know that for whatever reason, Rx is not the most popular with React, but I mean, based on my limited experience, it's something that people can look into if they want a little different type of architecture for their React app. Then you have one question from Ante. I think this one is for everyone. So in which phase of app development do you think that it's best to start optimizing application performance or to think about it? So when do you start thinking about performance?
I would say to start thinking about it as early as you can, because it can have a huge influence on how you architect your app. So if you know you're going to be making a lot of back-end requests, you will probably want to make sure that you can limit how many requests you're making. Or if you know you'll have a lot of different components that depend on each other's state in like a SPA or something, that completely changes how you might go about making your component architecture. So I would say start thinking about optimization as early in the process as you can.
Yeah, makes sense.
I 100% agree. I would even go for before you even start, like consider the context. What are you building? And then you might even end up with complete different tools to use. Because, for example, I don't know, if you do some certain renderings, Free.js might be a better case than using React or something, or Svelte. If you're just doing a graphics for a mini page, then Svelte might be a better choice than React, because React is really good at this composability and building larger applications. But then you might not get the best out of it if you want to do a mini page like the New York Times or so. So really, but in 99% of the cases, you know that already, and so you're good. But yeah, at that point, it's already. But then also, like, what state management library do you choose? So I had this a couple months back. It's like they started from blank, and they said like, yeah, we're building this complex form builder. Like, the only requirement we have is like this should be fast because it has to be a good experience, and then. You set yourself limits, and then you suddenly it completely rules out certain state management libraries entirely because it would be too slow.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I mean, you have some, let's say, performance constraints. And when it comes to performance, you have different types of performance. So let's say you have this uploading performance, so you get the app usable very fast and soon. Maybe that's one factor, and then you have like other types of performance. But maybe does Andrey have anything to say on this topic?
Yeah, on this question, I might be actually on the opposite side of barricades. So, well, just like Nik and Milecia, you have said, you have to optimize. But for me, you do the optimizations right away only if it's a common practice. If it's a well-known optimization like Memo or something like that, something that everybody knows and everybody understands, and it's easy to read, and it's not going to raise any other developer's eyebrows when they see it. But if you need to do a hack and you haven't actually measured the outcome of that hack, you haven't actually measured that your users are suffering because of the lack of performance, and you want to implement this hack just because you think it's cool and it's going to raise your FPS from, I don't know, from 60 to 62, that might not be a good idea, because from my point of view, it would be better to focus on maintainability of your code. And every hack is going to drastically drop that maintainability. And if you do this hack, make sure that you have twice as much documentation comparing to the amount of the code that you have written.
Okay, so I have a question about where to meet Finnish React developers, and I guess that's more for me, because I'm from Finland. I don't expect that you know the Finnish tech scene so well, and I mean, from my perspective, I think the best, you can meet Finnish React developers like everywhere in the world. I mean, the most in the big cities, but of course we have the majority in Finland, and that's one of the reasons why we run React Finland, is that when it's not so difficult time globally, then people can come to Finland to actually meet our developers and exchange. I think that's all we have for the questions. Unless you have any topic on mind, I think now we can move to the live coding section of the schedule.